Today is a bit of a sad day for the tax nerd in me, but I am ecstatic and over the moon as the human being, Tom, that I am. So let me talk about that a bit. One of the areas of tax law that I have always been interested in is innocent spouse relief and equitable relief, which is under Internal Revenue Code section 6015, C, B, F, whatever. Bottom line, tax code provisions allow a taxpayer who's really most of the time a stay-at-home spouse and homemaker to request relief from joint and several liability for when there's a joint tax assessment because a tax return was filed jointly with the other spouse and there was either an audit or an underpayment. And I had this case, I had this innocent spouse case, and it was the most interesting procedural fact pattern I've ever seen on an innocent spouse case. Okay, we had an issue with possibly an invalid notice of deficiency that my client never received. We had an issue with the fact that the underlying liability was being contested inside of a collection due process hearing, and that innocent spouse was raised in time within a 2-year period for the other tax nerds out there under 6015C. We had the CDP hearing from 2020, which was within that 2-year period, still open, but later we filed the paperwork to actually request innocent spouse relief. It was denied preliminarily, and we just won in our hearing on innocent spouse relief. But I was ready to go because I have several ways to tax court and several ways to contest a liability and request innocent spouse relief or to get that liability kicked out, right? There are several paths to relief because you can file a tax court petition in response to a notice of deficiency and raise innocent spouse as maybe an affirmative defense, not clear, not so sure, okay? You can file an innocent spouse claim after the assessments are already been made. And then if it's denied, then you can take your appeal to tax court. And you can also request inside of a collection due process hearing, if the taxpayer never received the notice of deficiency or never had an actual opportunity to contest the underlying deficiency before it was assessed, then you can contest the underlying deficiency inside of a collection due process hearing, which means that then you can go to tax court again as a result of the collection due process hearing and file a case and request relief as an affirmative defense under a collection due process hearing. So I hope if you're watching this far, at least one of you is keeping up with all of this. So that's why the tax nerd in me is sad today, because talk about hazards of litigation. This is probably the most fun fact pattern procedurally I've ever had, in a tax case, because there were so many avenues to success. And so many of those avenues to success make good law for taxpayers and bad law for the government. And while I don't think I actually won this case on hazards of litigation, sure, it made it easier for the IRS to say yes to me. Here's why I'm happy. My client had a husband. He hid all of his finances the entire time that they were together. He had an addiction problem. He was a very functional addict, and he would gaslight her if she ever asked him about the financial situation. He did not root her in. He did not let her have a role. It was a classic innocent spouse case. My client had no income of her own and had very little information on the financial status of the marriage. Until he died, she didn't even know how much money he was making. She was surprised to find out. He refinanced their home several times. She didn't know that that had happened either. And he was using this money to feed his drug addiction, and he was ashamed of it, and he was hiding it from her, and he was just trying to get through, I think probably as sometimes addicts do, and they rationalize their reasons why. And he was taking money from the family and paying it towards drugs to feed his addiction. Okay. So she had to go through all of that. And then he died. He took his own life. And after all of that, she finds IRS notices stowed away in his car, in his desk. He gets a notice of deficiency for a different tax year and comes to hire me for some information that something else is going on with another tax year. 2014. Something that happened. The money involved in this case, the source of liability, was 10 years ago now. And we're finally getting relief from this. So as a result of that audit, the husband apparently filed the joint return. So that's another thing too. I didn't answer my tax nerd thing before, but we're done with the tax nerd thing now. My client has been waiting and trusting me patiently since 2018 for the last 6 years, resolved one deficiency, and I've been fighting for her through aggressive IRS collection action with some cowboy revenue officer who filed liens and asked questions later, who filed levies and asked questions later. And nobody at the IRS cared. And the IRS couldn't give me a copy of the tax return they said was filed. They couldn't give me a copy of the notice of deficiency. I could be more mad at the IRS. All right, that's a hazard of litigation for them too. But I'm just happy right now because they're going to grant relief. My client's going to be off the hook for this tax liability, for this reminder of the pain for her decades-long relationship with her late husband, who, because, addiction is a disease and he couldn't overcome it, and that hurt his family. His family was suffering the result of that addiction throughout his entire time with that addiction, which was not a short period of time. And my client wanted to believe that he was better and that he got things straight, but he hid all of it from her. He didn't want to face it, and she wanted to believe it. So that's pretty common in innocent spouse cases in general. One way or another, the income earning spouse is hiding the financial situation from the other one. The landscape has changed over the years to allow for more financial abuse instead of just overt physical abuse, and allow for consideration of emotional abuse. And there are other things in play here that I could get into with the nerdiness of the tax thing. I was trying to protect, for anyone who does innocent spouse, I was trying to protect my 6015C claim for refunds. That's the one thing we gave up, is some refunds were levied. And I was trying to protect, which I think I did, but the IRS has agreed. And I was trying to protect the 6015C claim in general. I was trying to protect that because under that code section, the IRS has to establish that my client knew that there was an understatement of the tax liability. So they wouldn't have been able to prove that because my client didn't know. But interestingly enough, with 6015F relief, the taxpayer has to prove that they didn't have reason to know. And that's open for interpretation. You can look at what a reasonable person know. Did you have enough information to make further inquiry? And then, as a backstop, could you make inquiry? Would it be fruitful? Would it be pointless? In this case, it would be pointless because of the financial abuse. So sometimes you can't satisfy the IRS's needs that you didn't have a reason to know, because they see things that a reasonable person, or that they would see, and they would say, I have a reason to know and ask about this more. So maybe there's some of that there. But then you look at, well, what would have happened if you asked for more information? And that's where financial abuse and emotional abuse and physical abuse comes into. So at the end of the day here, we have an interesting story from a tax law perspective, and something that would have been really fun if vacuum fight over in court. But I am a little bit sad for the nerd in me, and I'm super happy for the human being in me and for my client, because she can finally put this chapter in her life behind her. She no longer has to face continued abuse from government collection as a result of earlier financial abuse from 10 years ago from her late husband. So if you've watched this far, thank you. I'm going to talk about this one more, and I really appreciate you watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below.